This is Oregon grape. So Oregon grape is most noted for its berries, which this doesn't have any right now, but they have yellow flowers and then grape-like grape clusters that are very sour. But that sour is good, as North Americans were not as tuned into the bitter and sour taste as other cultures, and that sour and bitter is actually beneficial. There are components in this, the berberin compounds, I believe they're called, in the roots and the leaves have some medicinal benefits to them. So the primary edible component is the berries, but the leaves, actually the very fresh new leaves in the spring, the new growth, are very pliable. These are hard and spiky. You wouldn't want to get these caught in your throat. They're kind of like holly, only holly is alternate on the stem, and they're all around the stem. So these look like holly leaves, but they're in the same plane and they're opposite one another. Holly is a deep green, and the spikes on the Oregon grape are in the same plane, whereas holly is kind of all different directions around. It has bright red berries that are not edible. So this is a smaller one here. It's still stiff too, but the tender fresh leaves are pliable, and they have some oxalic acid in it, so they're tart, but they're a good salad addition. You can just eat them straight off too. But so that's Oregon grape. So this is Indian plum. Has nice round leaves with no serrations on the edges. We can already see the buds coming out for next season. We're in December right now. But it's one of the earliest plants to put out flowers and bloom in the spring, along with salmon berries. And then it has these tiny, tiny purple plums that have a little bit of flesh on them. And you can get something out of that. You don't want to eat the seeds. You want to just eat the plum itself. So these are the leaves back here too. This is the new growth from last year. You can see the stem is still green on it. So this is Indian plum. And you'd have to gather a substantial amount of those plums to have anything consumable, but you could chew on that pit a while, just spit it out and chew the skin off. And it's purple, so it's going to have lots of antioxidants associated with it. This is stinging nettle, and stinging nettle is known for stinging. It's in the mint family, so it has square stems, but the spines on the surface are not toxic. It's only when you grab the bottom or the sides of the stems that you can get stung. They say that only a man of metal will grab a nettle, because you have to grab it and pull it away from you, because the spines are angled out, but if you go into it and pull out, you're going to be pulling the direction of the spines pointing, and they won't stick you. Another way to harvest it is with thick gloves, or you can pinch the surface and pinch it off like that. The top, again, doesn't sting, but the bottom, you would then just crush them, and the crushing action will release the toxins in the glandular trichomes, which are the little poison darts that stick into you, and you can just roll it into a little wad and just crush it up really nice. So cooking, drying, and crushing all deactivate the spines, and the juice actually is an antidote to the spine, to the sting. So juice from the nettle can help to take away the sting from the stinging nettle. But it can grow as tall as I am. During the summertime, it grows this tall here. We mowed it down so that we can harvest it in the spring, come through here and pick off the fresh growth. But it tastes like it tastes like freshly picked green beans. Exactly like green beans. Use it in place of spinach. It's very high in protein content. It's very, very usable. If I was stranded on a desert island, the two things I'd want would be stinging nettle and bull kelp, because they're very nutritious. But this has very high protein content, iron. It's actually very usable fiber too. The fibers can get the long, tall stems. You can process those fibers, and the Native Americans made fishing nets out of those fibers. They would weave them together, and they're still down in some of the museums in Seattle area. They have museum quality usable nettle nets that could be pulled out and used to catch fish today. And when I was in college, I read a book called Ishi, Last of His Tribe, about a Native American in California who escaped from pursuers using a nettle hair rope over a cliff. So you have to process them and weave them together into rope, but you can use them for lots of different twine and cordage, as well as food. As they mature, they become less palatable, but the early spring and the new growth are when you want to harvest it to eat it, and you would harvest it to dry it and have it for the next season for nettle tea. It's very good for things like diarrhea. If you drink too much, it can constipate you, so it works well for that. So it has lots of medicinal qualities in addition to use in that regard. Good source of iron, I believe, as well, and just a good all-around edible resource. So this is your native trailing blackberry. So we're accustomed to the Himalayan blackberry that stands up, but this is the native variety. And you can eat the blackberries. They're tiny, but they're edible. And of course, all blackberry leaves have astringent qualities. So you can use those. Sometimes they'll use them postpartum teas, blackberry teas, raspberry tea, leaf teas to help staunch bleeding as an astringent. And there was, we saw a demonstration of a guy who made himself a carrying basket out of the canes of this. He took a stiff glove and some cloth and stripped the needles or the spines and leaves, and then used the vines to make a basket, a berry basket in the field, so you can carry stuff with. So this is the evergreen blackberry. So evergreen blackberry and Himalayan blackberry are two non-native kind of invasive species of blackberries, but they'll have green canes all through the winter time. Here are the berry pods left over from last year. You would want to eat them, of course, when they're in season. The Himalayan is better tasting, in my opinion, but they come on at different stages in the season. So knowing them both, you would have an overlap of berries available. This is the evergreen blackberry. So this is the sword fern, and it's a very common fern. It can actually get like 5 feet tall. It can get very, very tall. One of the key ways of identifying it is each frondlet has a little bump out on it. So every good sword has a hilt, and so you can see that hilt, that bump out there on the sword fern leaflet there. On the bottom, you see the sori. These are the packets of spores that will then give rise to the new generation. But the portion of the sword fern that's edible is below ground, so you need to dig up the plant, and then you would roast the roots and eat the roots of the sword fern. Ferns, fiddleheads. Sometimes people eat fiddleheads. You want to cook ferns before eating them, especially in quantity, because they have an enzyme in them called thiaminase, which destroys vitamin B12 and the B vitamins. So eating lots of it for a protracted period of time would destroy the B vitamins in your body. So they need to be cooked. You can eat the fronds of other types of ferns, but this particular one, you want to roast the roots and peel them, and then eat them after they've been cooked. So that's a sword fern. This is self-heal. Self-heal is a low-growing plant this time of year, but it will grow up quite tall. Has a kind of a purple condensed flower spike on top. All the aerial parts, that is the parts above ground, are edible and medicinal. It is called self-heal because it has lots of healing qualities to it. They said that a carpenter who carries self-heal in his toolbox probably wasn't a very careful carpenter, because they would carry that in their toolbox to help with chisel wounds and whatnot as they're working. But it has a mucilage kind of a component to it that's very soothing for like skin conditions and all kinds of wound healing internally and externally. So self-heal is a very, very valuable plant. So lichens are not all lichens are edible, but there's some that are. The one that is most predominant on this particular sample here is the Usnea species of lichen, or genus of lichen, and that's this one here, the brushy one. The characteristic feature of all Usneas is if you take the central core and pull it apart, it has a central thread that runs down the middle of it. I don't know if you can zoom in on that and see that, but there's it's spongy, and there's like a central thread down the middle. Like if you took paracord, has that sheath on the outside and that central white section that goes down the center. That is the identifying feature of the Usnea species or genus. So there's several different species, but you know it's Usnea if it has that central cord. And the whole thing is edible of the Usnea, the plant. It's a fungus and a lichen, or lichen is a fungus and an algae that are in symbiosis. And it has antifungal, antiviral, antibacterial properties. There was a time where I actually used a deodorant that had Usnea as an ingredient in it for its antibacterial properties. And it's actually been used in pneumonia treatments, like bacterial and viral pneumonia. They've been able to use Usnea effectively in treating that. You can eat it in small quantities, but in larger quantities you would want to leach it. There's some leaching processes that you'd want to go to, but it actually is a great fire starter. If you just take some of this and harvest it, you can carry it and use it like you would dryer lint for fire starting, because it's very fine and be dry. You could also take it and just pop it under your hat and it'll dry out through the course of your hiking around. But that's Usnea, and it's a symbiotic algae and fungus that live together, and all lichens are a symbiotic relationship.
To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.